We're blessed today to have Keila Menjivar, organizer with the San Diego Organizing Project, to provide initial opening thoughts for us, because this is a small group Sunday. And I know we've been talking about organizing for a while, but just a continued reminder, we're trying to create spaces where people can share, ideally in one-on-one opportunities, share their pain about what is really causing them to struggle in their life. And the more that we can share those stories with each other, we can start to weave a tapestry of potential action that we can do together. So that's part of the magic and the mystery and miracle of organizing. So grateful for you to be here today with us. Thank you for honoring us in this way, and looking forward to this time together.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Father Colin, and thank you all for many things. One of them is welcoming me into your community for the last few weeks and months, actually. And I'm looking forward to exploring the questions that we're going to be exploring with you all today, really centering on how we manifest God's dream for our lives. And shoot, I forgot to set a timer. I'm going to try and keep this, if you can just wink at me or something when it's my time. But I want to start off by sharing a little bit about my experience being here at St. Luke's. Specifically, around 2 weeks ago, I was sitting over on that side, and I was surrounded by a bunch of children. And there was this moment where Joseph Jack was facilitating the service, and we asked for who had prayer requests or things that they were grateful for. And it was during that period that I was sitting there surrounded by children that I had this kind of metaphysical experience of feeling like I was transported back to my childhood church. And it was a moment where I saw myself in the kids around me and realized that St. Luke's is very, very similar to the church that I grew up in. And this has definitely come up in the conversations that I've been having with all of you. And I realized in listening to a lot of your stories and seeing how you show up here in your community, that a lot of the questions I'm asking of you and wanting to learn about you, I haven't even asked or never got to ask my own dad or my grandfather. I grew up in a church similar to St. Luke's in that it was a church that was incredibly diverse from folks all over Latin America. My dad was a family that came in the 80s during a civil war there. And in chatting with all of you and listening to your stories, not only do I realize that there's so much about my own story that I don't know, but that there's so much similarity globally across what we experience. I see this pattern of survival that exists across the world and then continues to manifest in our communities. What I see here and the reason why sitting over there and being transported to my childhood church was so impactful is because I see this pattern of escaping and leaving situations that were put our lives at risks, and this was really the last and the thing that we had to do to survive. And then we get here and we're trying to figure out how we survive here, paying rent here, trying to make life work here. And as I was sitting with this realization, the realization being that St. Luke's is very similar to the church that I grew up in. I came back to why I was drawn not just to organizing, but specifically to faith-rooted organizing. And it's because the church that I grew up in the love that they showed me and my family, and we showed other families, I saw that we have the capacity and that we are here to manifest God's dream. One of the readings that I was inspired by as I was looking at the readings for this week was Joseph's story. Joseph in the Old Testament. And one of the reasons why he stood out and his story stood out to me, other than it was a childhood favorite of mine, was that Joseph was constantly in these cycles of kind of being at the top, right? He was like born into a family where he was really loved. He was his father's favorite. And then his brothers sell him into servitude, and he ends up down at the bottom. And then he's in servitude, and the text describes Joseph as having favor in God's eyes and doing everything he did successfully. And there's a cycle of he rises up to be Potiphar's most trusted servant, and then he ends up in prison down at the bottom again. And then in prison, he ends up rising again. He becomes the warden's most trusted prisoner, and he ends up not just like what I sense is kind of running the prison, but also being support to those around him. And in that support and how he showed up in that support, it was by leaning into the gifts that he had. Joseph had the gift of not just dreaming, but also interpreting dreams. And him leaning into the things that he was good at time and time again, even when he was down at the bottom multiple times. He leaned into what he was good at, and he leaned into his gifts. And eventually, having that gift of dreaming and interpreting dreams didn't just lead him to get himself out of where he was in prison, but also to save an entire region from famine. And the part that sticks out to me that is specifically part of the reading is that he tells his brothers that perhaps he came to be and sold into servitude and gone through all that he did so that he could save the region, or support, so that God could use him in saving the region from famine. And part of how I connect that to our story is that we are constantly also, in our own way, finding ourselves in these cycles of success and feeling at peace or safety. And then also, because of the conditions of the realities we live in, we're also having to kind of survive. And what I'm excited to explore with you all and really be in conversation with you all is, how do we then bridge the gap between God's dream, which I believe God's dream is that we live safely, that what we experience in this church and in this community, we experience outside of this church, that we feel safe in our homes, that we have access to food, that we have access to health care. I believe that that's God's dream for our lives, because ultimately, God designed this planet to be abundant. So I think we should be living that way. So before I hand it off to Father Colin to support in how we will be spreading out, I just want to invite you all to think about two things in particular, which is, what is God's dream? What is the dream that manifests in this church through the service and through the relationships that we have with each other? And what is our role in taking what we experience here and externalizing it, so that we are not just building systems of care in this church, but that we are building systems of care in San Diego? All right, I'm going to pass it back to Father Colin. I'm excited to chat with you all.
All right, thank you, Keila. So if I could have the small group facilitators come up. Most of you all are experts in this process, but just a reminder, there's a number on the front of your bulletin. This would correspond to one of these 6 areas in the bulletin.